Michelle, and I think Scotland is ace. Yeah, it's my chosen home. It's where I live and I work as a clinical psychologist and a research fellow, working on complex trauma at Edinburgh University. And I just think it's a country full of non-conformists. So like, think about the national animal of Scotland. It doesn't exist, it's a chemical. The national drink of Scotland. It's not a real flavour. Brew is not a flavouring. And then the national food, it's, what's the name? It's that stuff encased in mac and cheese pie. That's not food. And you might be wondering why I use the word ace, and partly it's my kind of North American twang, because I've lived in Canada, so. Partly because at some point, any time in Scotland, somebody's listening to Ace of Spades. Because Scotland has the largest proportion of metalheads I've ever seen in any country. But mostly, the reason why I think Scotland is ace is because it's aiming to become the first ace-aware nation in the world! Yeah, it's aiming to be aware of aces. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Okay, so aces mean adverse childhood experiences. It's bad things happening to kids. Yeah, sorry, I made you cheer that. And I know it's not the funnest topic, so I have a few cheesy jokes kind of in my back pocket, metaphorically. So I'll, keep you safe, we won't get too upset. But I'm a psychologist, we have to regulate the emotions in the room. But just thinking about kind of why it's important that we are aware that bad things can happen to people and can happen to kids and can affect them. You might think it's obvious, we've all seen bad films, we've all watched the news, but actually there's kind of a few examples of when society has looked and then looked away. And I think it's good to kind of, be aware of it. So the first kind of obvious example, does anyone know of Sigmund Freud? Yeah? Whoop if you think he's cool? Okay, that means you want to do psychology. Whoop if you think he's meh. Means you've probably done some psychology. And he actually, one of his early theories in the 1880s was that kind of hysteria, that thing where women had wombs. But essentially, his early theory that mental health problems could be caused by childhood abuse. Pretty good theory. We've got really strong evidence that being kind of traumatized in early life can be a risk factor for mental health problems. But as he went along and he tested this theory, one of his few we could actually test, that he tested it, he gathered evidence, and he just found that too many people were confirming this. He didn't want to believe that all these people coming for talking therapy really had experienced difficult things. So instead, it's kind of gross, he renamed his theory the seduction theory. Yeah, that kids were fantasizing about this stuff. Boo. Yeah. But speaking about seduction, how do you get a bear to come out of the woods? You use camembert. It's a cheese joke. And then one of the next times, it's not as clean an example, but in the kind of 60s, 70s, 80s, society was getting a bit more kind of open about talking about individual lives. People were going for therapy, people were talking about their families. There wasn't this idea of what happens in the family stays in the family, so people were starting to share bits about their experiences, and people were starting to talk about difficult things that happened when they were kids. And around the same time, cognitive psychology was doing some great stuff about memory and attention and understanding how our brains work. And we kind of know memory is not like Black Mirror. We don't just record, rewind, delete. Memory isn't factual, that it's influenced by lots of different things. So how we feel, our emotions at the time, or what we believe before something happens, and then also how we're reminded of it. So memory isn't a true record of what's happened. But this got taken really too far, and in the 90s there were proposals to have, what's it called now? I can't remember. To have a false memory syndrome put into the diagnostic manual. And I suppose this kind of was highlighting that if somebody came forward as an adult and said, I remember something horrible happening, that people could say, no, you just have a false memory, there's no way to prove that happened. So you can see why that would shut people down from coming forward or acknowledging things that happened. But when we were thinking about kind of how to hide things or how to prove things, how do you hide a horse? You use mascarpone. And there's an unlikely hero in this, and it's controversial, but the Catholic Church. But think about it, like the scale of the abuse that happened in the Catholic Church through the 90s, through the early 2000s, that people finally kind of started listening and going, actually this happened internationally, locally, pillars of the community, people that everyone trusted, these bad things were happening. And finally we think we're at a point where we're like, if a child says, I feel uncomfortable, we might actually listen to them now and not just say, oh wait, that person in power obviously is right. So in some ways I think we've at a point where we can't really look away and pretend it's not happening. And that's why I think being an ACE Aware Nation is a good thing. And I was thinking a little bit about ACEs, just to clarify, it's not necessarily just about kind of child abuse and trauma. So ACEs could include things like parents being divorced or somebody having an addiction problem in the home. And the idea is that things that happen in people's lives can be stressful and can impact their mental health, and the child's in school and they're struggling, it's about thinking what's going on in their life rather than they're just being naughty. So it's just, essentially it comes down to just be cool, just be compassionate, just think you don't know what's going on in people's lives. And in adults we think about can being trauma informed. So again, it's acknowledging that really difficult things do happen to people. They can be quite difficult, but also people can be okay. And it's about just, the more we understand and the more we talk about it, the better it is, I think, for everybody. So thank you for bearing with me. It's been a difficult topic. I've got 2 more cheese jokes I'm going to spoil it. So what happened to the South African who ate lots of cheese?
What?
Well, he got feta and feta. And just one more before I go, because it's the cutest joke I've ever heard. What did the cheese say to itself looking in the mirror? Hello, me.